talking about why we've chosen our API management solution and how we will be using that in our first project. So, let's start with ambitions. We've heard it all in the keynote speakings. To have great ambition is a good thing. So our ambition is to work together on a sustainable society. And that society will be transitioning to sustainability. We as an energy company, as a grid company, with what we see, everything is moving more to solar, more to wind. We see that everyone is moving from coal, from gas, from oil. Everything gets a bit downgraded. So the public opinion about traditional energy, well, it changes. People move more towards local generated energy. Local energy communities will arise. And for us as a grid company, this poses on one hand some challenges because it changes the dynamics on our grid. And yeah, well, in the Netherlands we have one of the most reliable grids in the world. It's about 99.99% uptime. But on the other hand, well, it also gives us a lot of possibilities and opportunities. So new companies will arise. You see it also here in San Francisco. Silicon Valley is a great incubator for that. A lot of small companies will arise, and as Alliander, as a grid provider, we are a semi-government organization. We want to stimulate that. Now, so what are our core businesses? We are in energy networking, and it's only on the distribution level. So we have no production and also no trade, and it also gives us an independent role. And therefore we can, of course, interact with multiple parties who do generation, and especially with large parties who do green and renewable energies. So we want to move to more sustainable energies and hence contribute to a better society. So moving through a couple of themes that we are working with external parties. So it's smart cities, smart metering, and of course privacy is very important there. Electric mobility is something we would like to encourage. And what we see is that besides that, the energy world is changing, so the transition to more sustainable energy, also called the energy transition, and we have more changes that are coming. So on one hand, my business wants to do faster developments. I want to innovate. I want to test some new product. I want to do a pilot test. And so I wanted to do innovation. And on the other hand, yeah, well, if the pilots become successful, well, let's move on to production. And for business users, it's still a bit difficult, the distinction between pilot and production, because sometimes a pilot will stay in pilot phase for multiple years, unfortunately. So what we want to do is we want to have something that can be future-proof, and we want to focus on new functions. Instead of having multiple pilots with everyone building identity, metering, and customer management, we want to focus on that one small part that is adding value, and only pilot that part. What we also see is that technology changes very rapidly. So every time a new device, we have the Apple Watch coming out, we have the Nest thermostat. Next time it's your T-shirt, or it is your Google Glass, or whatever. So the user interfaces changes rapidly every year. New technology, a few years ago it was XGS, now it is Angular, and it goes on and on and on. And the pace in which front-end technology evolves is in a much faster pace than that back-end technologies does. So what we also have, as a semi-government organization, we are also bound to a regulatory framework. So because we are paid, people do not choose us, they just have to pay our network fine. And that gives us a lot of responsibility. So we cannot do everything with just one because it's taxpayers' money. And so we have to take that into account. So our emphasis as a network grid company will be more on providing data services. And that is why we like open data, because open data, today we heard a lot about open source. I'd like more to talk about open data and open standards, because that is what really also adding value. And currently what we offer as open data is only just a plain CSV file on a website. And well, that does not give us a lot of insight about how people are using that. So what we want to move to is more real-time information, which is monitored, and getting that connection to the end user who is using it. And to do everything, we come up with a strategy, and our strategy is to move to, yet again, a platform. And our platform will provide business or business services. So, yeah, of course, we all know how to distinct front end from back end, and this is also what we are focusing on. So we want to have a stable back end, which is scalable, which has a slower pace, so focus on stability, quality, scalability, and we'll have a lifespan of at least 3, 5, and maybe 10 years. And while your front-end technology or your app which you're building on top of that, maybe you build it for half a year just for pilot testing, maybe for 3 years, and then there's new technology and you throw it away. So, what are the platform features in our platform? So, well, our core key platform features for the first one is metering data, identity, and CRM. I will get back into what backend systems we'll be using in a few slides when we come to our first moving project. On the roadmap are geographical data, so our GIS system, scheduled maintenance, and outages. So if you want to do all that and move towards a platform strategy, you have to have some architectural principles to go along with it, because if everybody, you have to know what you want to do. So if you want to build an API, of course it needs to be monitored, you want it to document it. Another important thing is you want to build it with reusable, with an application in mind. So you can build a very generic API which everybody can use, which perhaps has a field which says cost and value over here, but then it's not very usable. If you have an API, for instance, to get one metadata point or one time series, well, my front end might have to show 10 time series and will have to do 10 calls. It's better to have one call in which I can retrieve 10 time series. It will perform much better on my front end situation. And the other thing is you want to move to standards. There are, for certain things, not a lot of standards, but for other things there are. So for instance, we have OpenID-Connect for authentication, REST for REST standard, and JSON for communication with the backend, and the API's gateway. But when talking about data standards, we have a SIM standard, but there are not a lot of standards there. And what we have noticed, well, an app developer really don't care as long as an API it is documented and he can find it. And another thing that we want is to use client users throughout the system. Isabella talked about using identity transformations when you're calling a backend system. That is something we do not like. The reason behind it is that if you transform an identity, you need to have some broker in the middle in your integration layer that does all the authorization stuff. And it's much easier if your backend system handles all the authorization, and therefore you also have end-to-end monitoring and auditing for what the user does. And therefore, yeah, of course, we talked about API management. That is why you need at least an API management functionality. So I'd like to compare API management with tourism. You can have such a nice SOA platform or SOA architecture. If nobody knows about it and nobody is using it, well, you don't have anything on it. You want to have developers using it, and it has to be marketed throughout your organization. Our first platform is for internal use, and if someone wants to access it, they need to have one central portal for documentation. Okay, our first moving project is Energy Atlas. We're almost into production phase. We're running up at the moment, and it will give detailed anonymous insight for housing cooperations. And the architecture looks like this. It has an Angular HTML5 front-end on it, integration layer in between. We use WSO2 Identity Server for single sign-on, and we have a few backend systems. So we use S3, which is ArcGIS Online, as a geo system. We use Salesforce also for CRM, AnyTrust for metering data system, we have a few specific custom microservices which is Jux REST service, and we have some SAP BI systems which hold our metering data, which will well load into our metering system. And our environment looks like this. In previous talks we already heard about how to deploy the API manager, and we split it up in totally. So what we did is we have 3 front-end facing systems. So the API store, the gateway, and the identity server. And on the identity server we also deployed the API key manager. Everything is set up in a cluster except the governance registry and the API publisher, because that doesn't require high availability, and we use Puppet to roll everything out. Okay, when we have such a nice system, how do we make use of it? So how do we call a backend service, and especially how do we do it making use of the client end user? So we want the user knocking on my front end, so on my API gateway. We want the user also to be present in my backend system and do the authorization there. So this is a principle, it's called impersonalization, making each call to the backend as the end client. And of course end-to-end logging auditing and ensuring proper authorization rules. How does it work? Impersonalization is all about trust. So I have my client which has a trust with my API gateway. He has logged in, he has a token which gives him a trust with the gateway. So the client will trust the one with the token to be the person who he says he is. And then again, I have a backend system which may or not be in my full control. Like I mentioned, we use Salesforce, which is a SaaS solution. It's a system we do not control. And on the other hand, we do want that user to connect to Salesforce. And for Salesforce, we also use Salesforce communities. So Salesforce community users is something different than named users. It is essentially that every user of that system will get a user in Salesforce. So when they add a call or something else, they will just show up, and Salesforce will handle all the authorization for us. Okay, what does every component do in this setup? So the API gateway will terminate the trust on the front end, and the ESB will establish a trust to the back end. And to do that, there are several possibilities to establish a trust in the back end. For the front end, it's an OAuth token, and in the back end, we can use several possibilities. So what we can do, of course, we can set a header, and it says user ID is 1, and my backend system will interpret that. But if every system is allowed to set a header with user ID 1, well, that's not so trustworthy. So you have to do VPN, SSL certificates, system user authentication, whitelisting. And for Salesforce, it's a bit more difficult. If you want to connect to Salesforce, the only possibility you have is using their API interface, which only allows OAuth authorization. So what you can do is you can use the OAuth2 GBT Barrett token flow, which is a very nice Scrabble word. And in essence what it does, it lays a trust by placing a certificate on the SaaS solution and on your ESB solution. And whenever you want to retrieve an OAuth token for a specific user, you will make a message, sign it, and place it to Salesforce and say, dear Salesforce, can I please get an OAuth token of user X? Sign that package, send it to Salesforce, and it will get you an OAuth token straight back. It does require some customization. Every backend system is different, so a lot of time goes into making and tuning that. Every system has a header. So in essence what we use the normal system user authentication for one backend system, and for Salesforce you use the GBT Barrett token flow. What you can also do is not using, if you want to do this, so for instance if you want to go to Salesforce and say I have this user, then it might be possible, then that user must be present. Why do we want to do impersonalization? It's just that because the backend system can do our authorization rules and for logging. If you put everything so you can put the user role also in the header, then the user needs not to be provisioned. And that's what the next thing is about authorization model and user provisioning. So a typical authorization model looks like this. We have a user which has a role and it leads to a specific permission. And that specific permission leads to something a user can do in a specific backend system. And in that backend system, we will then define a role which leads to the specific permission. If you want to do the central administration on that, so we have a lot of users and want to provision to my backend system, we can administrate them in the identity server, which then publishes or then back to the backend system. And in the IS, we will only use the user and the role. And if we provision a user to a backend system, we will only say we have this user and he has this role. So in order to do that, we will have to, of course, first create the roles and permissions in each backend system. And you can also set the user or the role in a header, then you don't have to do the whole provisioning beforehand. But for some systems it's required, and otherwise it's also a performance gain if you do so in advance. And this leads to a specific small of clean generic roles in my identity server. So I can only have an employee or an admin or a super user role central in my identity server, which makes it clean and administratable. So what are our experience? For user provisioning, there is a nice protocol. It's called simple SCAM, and we tried it with Salesforce. The only thing we found out is it's a bit limited. Salesforce also has users, roles, public profiles, and groups, so it just does not work. And so again, we ended up with some custom work. And another thing you have to think about is retry mechanisms. If you want to provision a user, but my backend system is down, what do I do? Do I want to retry it again? Do I want to go within an arrow queue? Currently, we just use an arrow queue to find out how often a backend system is down. Enabling users. User provisioning might take a while. So what can you do? You can also create a user, send a user an email, say, well, dear user, we have created a user profile for you. Please click links to activate. If activation will take a while, then everyone will think, oh, it just takes a while for my email to arrive. Okay, other lessons we've learned. Well, it is very important to use a partner with proper knowledge about the product. So we partnered up with Yenlo, who is our implementation partner. They're also here and having the booth here. We're using WS support. Before this integration stuff, we are using a lot of features which are just replaced. So I did IS5, API Manager 1.7, and if a specific feature is just released, it might sometimes not exactly be what you require. So using support, we can get WSO2 support, and they'll fix it for some time. And of course, what we've learned is, well, doing innovative projects is exciting. And so, concluding, energy transition is taking fast in a very fast pace. And to keep up and provide everything we want and to transform to a sustainable society, we need to stay with our technology stack, for which we have chosen WSO2. Just start. Eventually, if you don't start and keep piloting, trying everything, you won't get there. So start and keep, of course, the end in mind. And then I'm perfectly on time with about 6 minutes. Are there questions? Yes. Yeah, I'll just step down because otherwise I don't see much through the light.
Have you picked up a lot of user statistics or
well,
noticed in the community and people actually using the API?
We're not live at the moment, and our first goal is for internal development. So no, we have not. But of course we hope so, and also for open data we hope to get a lot of feedback, and that's also why we hope the API manager will give us a lot of features.
That's a good model. Really nice presentation. If we get a little more of that stuff happening here in the States, I think it would benefit a lot. lot of companies.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I was curious, do you, in your API, do you currently
In your API implementation, do
Yes.
you institute approval workflow? Like when user sign up has to go through a workflow in order to be approved, or is it open to everyone?
No, it's not up for everyone. So the product now we are running for housing corporations, and there is a sales flow which will create a corporation. Currently, it's on our service desk has to create the users, but we want to go to an admin user of a corporation, which then in turn can create users. So what we did, we've created a flow in Salesforce, in which so Salesforce will be the only application that the service desk will use. So it also will create the users from Salesforce, which then call an API on the identity server and will provision users to all backend systems. And the identity server will send out an email and saying, well, the user, your account is created, please click here to create a password.
So you're essentially that you assigned the API, it's under the access control. So certain users have certain access to API you provision in the backend flow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what we do up front. We provision all permissions and roles in the backend systems. So if a new account, so a new housing corporation is added in our metadata backend, we will create an organization with a role for that user. And once users are added, they can be linked to those roles.
And then, do you do a fine-grained control that you use Zagmo?
We do fine-grained. The model we've chosen is that fine-grained controls are the responsibility of the backend system. So from the integration layer, we only push the role and also the organization the user is belonging to, and the backend system is fully responsible for fine-grained authorization model. This also keeps your integration layer lightweight because you don't want to do fine-grained authorization model. You have to expose your fully model from your backend system, otherwise to the integration layer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just saying that some of the fine-grained control is just to separate that some people have update, and then read only.
True. Yeah, what we saw is that we can distinguish only a few roles. So for this application, we only have an employee role and an administrative role. That's the only distinction. We don't need a lot of things to do. Other thing you can do, then it's mostly tweaking the role or setting the permissions, and that will be done in backend systems. Thank you. Other people? Okay, so thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks, Sander. So we'll go into a break now, and we're going to reconvene at 3:30. If you're coming back to this room, we'll have the IoT track here, and the integration track will be in the next room. And if you want to catch some of the other tracks, it will be in the smaller rooms behind this. So we'll have directional banners to guide you through. Thank you.